I thought the cane toad movie was pretty good. It does actually squeeze in a bunch of relevant science that comes up later in our class. The guy who made that movie is actually a pretty well-educated ecologist. So that scene where the guy's driving down the road swerving to hit all the frogs, the movie maker didn't want to have an impact on frog mortality, so he actually used potatoes to replicate frogs in that scene. But one of my students has parents who live in Australia, and they said that it's real. Everybody does try to hit them, and at a particular time of the year, they're more common on the roads because they try to warm up in the mornings. And so at a particular time of the year, the roads in Queensland, according to my student's dad, are like greased by like a constant black slick of frog guts. And my father has driven through northern Argentina where the frogs are native, and he says they really do make that popping sound. Why? Because they trap air. If you run them over head first, it closes the mouth. And so all the air that used to fill the head goes back to the stomach, and then as you roll past that, it goes.
But like, why are they just running over these frogs?
Well, my dad, because he's a sociopath. Australians, because a lot of them are ecologically minded, so they just try to limit the impact of this invasive species. Number 50. We moved the sugar cane from Central America to other places because sugar is pretty sweet. And then with the sugar cane came this pest of the sugar cane called the sugar cane beetle. And we noticed that in Central America, the sugar cane beetles aren't a problem for the sugar cane because this frog eats them. So we moved the cane toad with the sugar cane to places where sugar cane is being hammered by its native predator, the sugar cane beetle. And punchline in number 50, the species never see each other in Australia, and this is actually a really powerful ecology lesson. There's a lot of peripheral variables that keep the sugarcane grubs in the same environment as the cane toad. Apparently in South America, there are predatory birds that eat the sugarcane grubs up high in the sugarcane. So because there's so many birds up there, the beetles lay their eggs down in the ground. So because the eggs are in the ground, the grubs are near ground level. But in Australia, there isn't a predator for the adult beetle. So the beetle lays its eggs up higher in the sugarcane plant, and the toads are on the ground and the grubs are up high and they never see each other. Plus the time of day. In South America, they're both out during the daytime, but for some reason, the beetles are only out at night in Australia. So, punchline for number 50, they were introduced to control the beetle, and they never ate the beetle larvae, the grubs. Number 51, the cane toad is a perfect example of all the reasons why invasives suck. Please look up, this is actually ecology vocab. They make a lot of babies, so they have a high reproductive potential. They're toxic, which is a really good advantage in Australia, but can anybody explain to me why they're still toxic in South America and that doesn't help? There's plenty of things that eat the cane toad in South America.
Have they adapted to the toxin?
Who has?
The predators?
You can imagine that in Australia, one of these days, some Australian predator will eat a cane toad and by coincidence have the right proteins in its gut to digest the toxin of the cane toad. This is a matter of time before some predator gets lucky And you can imagine that predator who eats a cane toad and lives, they're going to be like, hey, look at all these cane toads. Nobody else is eating them, so they're going to have a bunch of food. So they'll have more babies than the other predators. And over time, predators adapt. But right now, that toxicity is a new trick in Australia. None of the predators know how to flip it over and tear the skin off. None of the predators have evolved the protein to digest the toxin. Anybody here into tennis? So I heard, who's the male player that's most dominant right now? He's kind of older.
Rafael Nadal.
Impossible. Speaks English like pretty decently, but has a bit of an accent. So I heard an interview with Terry Gross on Fresh Air with that guy. And they're like, why are you so dominant? And he's like, it's really not that I'm dominant. Everybody else is about as good as I am. But the only thing that you've got is a combination of skills that the other guys haven't practiced fighting against. The way that this tennis player explained it on the radio, he said, if you've got like a really good backhand and a really good serve, and they're not used to playing somebody with a good backhand and a good serve, then it's tough for them to fight off both of your tricks, and so you beat them by a few points. That's evolution, actually. Eventually, the players get used to Rafael Nadal, and so then it'll be like used to his game, and then they've trained to beat him, and so then he's going to lose sooner or later. The cane toad showed up with a new game. It's got a new trick that nobody knows. You know, if you played basketball and you're the first guy with a jump shot, all the defenders would be like, holy crap, that guy just jumped. And then it takes a while to get used to that. Evolutionary novelty. The other thing that the cane toads have is they outcompete other frogs because their babies are born they're born earlier. They mature into tadpoles earlier, and they mature into adult frogs earlier so they can eat all the other tadpoles. Australian frogs are small, so temperature variation is very dangerous, so they lay their eggs a little bit later. And because they're little tiny eggs, they take a while to be a tadpole, and then it takes them a while to become a frog. But the cane toads, they lay their eggs sooner, they become adult frogs sooner, and while they're messing around in the water, they eat all of the other frog species. Finally, the cane toad is not that picky. They can live anywhere, they can eat anything, they're not really picky. You saw them eat golf balls in the thing last night, and the thing yesterday. So check this out for number 2. I find this to be kind of interesting. We could say like plants and algae. Say insect. We could put the cane toad here. And we could say that there's some predators above the cane toad. So here's a crazy thought. They have a lot of babies, and they eat the offspring of their competitors. So check this out. The cane toad expands and replaces other secondary consumers, other parts of its own trophic level. Does that make sense to everybody? They're toxic, so they tend to lower predator levels because they kill the predators that would otherwise eat them. And they're not super picky, so they eat all sorts of different insects. You could say that by dropping in a cane toad, you have a ripple effect throughout that one trophic level that kind of spreads up to other trophic levels like a big bullseye. And then you can probably assume that if there were apex predators, there might even be some impact up there. And if these insects are important to the plants and the algae somehow, then there might even be an impact down here. You can see the ripple effects of introducing an invasive species. In number 52, they outcompete their own trophic level. They eat everything in the trophic level below them, and they poison everything in the trophic level above them. If you're having trouble with your cell phone, I find that I can really fix them up by putting boogers on them. So if you ever want me to fix up your phone, just leave it out and I'll put some boogers on there.
No, I just wasn't here yesterday, so
I can put some boogers on there. Boogers on? Got you, fam? No phones in the class, bro. Ripple effect spreading upward and downward, trophic cascade, you might remember from the last unit. And P.S., all of these advantages, these are all evolution terminology. So the cane toad is a really good way to bring up some stuff that we're going to discuss later. Would anybody like to ask me anything about this cane toad movie? While you transition to assignment 3.1, I'll point out that the cane toad is one of the world's most famous invasive species, but there's a lot of other ones. So I should have 25 of you. So only one of you has not signed up. Ooh, then for you, I would suggest you photograph this so you can go home and find a globally invasive species that isn't already taken by one of these people. But good job, children. Period 5 has done the best so far at signing up for invasive species. Don't forget also to sign up for an endangered species. It's really challenging now, because 120 kids have already signed up before you, so it'll be tough to find a unique species, but for the endangered species report, yours has to be unique. Everybody should know that the wanted toasters due Tuesday, and the endangered species report is due Wednesday. Okay, that leaves us maybe about an hour-ish to do the assignment 3.1. And I'm only going to do today the first like 4 or 5 study goals. We're going to leave succession for another lecture. Vocab questions? Vocab questions? No vocabs?
With primary production, when you look it up in the philosopher, it just says seed production, primary. Yeah, isn't just can you expand on primary production?
Yeah, you should not use the glossary. Those definitions aren't useful. When you're reading in the text, it'll explain the vocab words. I never use the definitions in the back because they're not always useful. It's not the right way to define the vocab. You should do it in the order as you read the chapter. Primary productivity is the biomass that's added by producers. Who else? You guys do this strings thing where you don't ask about the vocab, and I don't believe you that you have all the words, and then your other students seem to get them in other periods and you don't. Which is scary. Yes?
Is energy efficiency like a conceptual, like how efficient it is? Or is it like a given number of input to output ratio?
It is a ratio of input to output.
And then when you do ratios as fractions, is it like, would it be input on top, output on bottom?
think it might be the other way around, because it's usually a percentage. So
Okay.
output over input.
Okay.
What else? Yeah, miles per gallon is an output over an input.
That makes sense.
Rise over
Is it?
rise over
Okay, nobody wants to ask me any vocab questions? Yes?
Can you give an example of entropy?
I can, and I want to do that as part of a study goal, and I want to do that pretty soon. Anybody else? Yeah.
Could you expand on facilitation?
Sure. After a disruption, the parts of that ecosystem don't all return at once. I'll bet you know this because we had a fire, and if you watch a place that had a fire in the last few years, the first spring you'll see a bunch of grasses and nothing else, and the second year you start to see some little herbaceous plants and sage and stuff. And then by the third or fourth year you start to see some little tiny oak trees. A facilitator is an early species that creates the conditions that allow a later species. So the grass makes enough shade that the sage can sprout, and then the sage holds enough moisture that the oak tree can sprout. Yeah?
Did you say that facilitation is an example of secondary succession?
Yeah. It's when early secondary succession species allow for later secondary succession species to sprout. And this is in and of itself a separate lecture, which is, I'm going to leave this for Friday. Yeah.
So are pioneer species not facilitating?
Pioneer species can be facilitators, but they can also be an interference species or neither. They can be nothing special. But the point is that they're the first. Pioneer species are the first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so like say a horse is walking and it poops and the poop becomes fertilizer for plants. Is that an example of facilitation? Because it's helping the plant? Not hurting the horse?
You're right that it is. I don't think so. My history of this term is a species whose presence changes the environment in a way that helps another one. So you change one of the abiotic variables to support. But yeah, I guess you could say that horse poop facilitates plant growth by providing nutrients. I don't know, man. So far, all the examples that I've ever seen, the only way that I've ever seen this used is where one plant helps another plant grow. But I don't know if your example of horse poop seems to me to be a logical use of that word. I'll just caution you that so far I've only seen it in plants. Yeah.
So you're saying one plant or one thing won't affect the other thing, it just creates the right conditions for the other one to grow?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the big examples are securing topsoil, shading the soil, or trapping moisture. There's probably some stuff about nutrients too, but those are the three that I remember off the top of my head. Yes?
Could you also talk a little more about interference?
So that would be the opposite, where one species makes it so that others cannot grow. So a classic example of interference is eucalyptus. Eucalyptus does really well after a fire, but eucalyptus plants keep other plants from growing. Eucalyptus has something about the leaves or about the, I don't know. Somehow eucalyptus prevents the growth of other species. So eucalyptus interferes with oak recovery.
Does it have to be recovery, or could it be in a place where there just doesn't have a life in general?
I think that would only be recovery because there's really a place where there's no life on Earth. But yeah, because we're talking about succession, these are places that are bouncing back from a disturbance. What else? Yes.
A disturbance like that would be different, though, than like an invasive species coming in and disturbing the ecosystem.
Generally, yes. And so you're talking about something that wipes the landscape. Mudslide, big fire, tidal wave, nuclear bomb. Humans, when we clear cut, or like, raising a farm to make a building site or whatever. Yeah.
Are pioneer species always plants?
I think so. I think so. You know, succession is usually just about the plants because you really don't get an ecological community of animals where there aren't plants. So succession is basically all just discussing plants. Like at the very end of succession, we sort of expect the food web to fill in. Yes?
Can you talk more about the first law of energy efficiency?
Yes, I'd like to, and I want to do that as my first babble. First law and second law, A, it's on every single AP test guaranteed, no exceptions ever. This is always on the AP test. There's not that many things that are always on the AP test. B, you can memorize it, but the crappy thing is that the College Board is a little bit more analytical than just memorizing. And C, you've probably heard them before. So you can check your notes if you don't have them, and I'm going to ask you to add something to your notes if you do have them. First law of thermodynamics says energy is neither made nor lost, it just changes form. Energy is neither made nor lost, it just changes form. And then the second law of thermodynamics says when energy changes form, quality is lost. And I'll explain what I mean by quality. But before I do that, even if you already had the right stuff in your notes, I'd like you to put amount next to first law, and I'd like you to put quality next to the second law, wherever you have this in your notes, because that's going to come up later this unit, in future units, at least 2 or 3 other times. So I want to start with this now. The amount of energy never changes, it's always the same. When energy changes forms, though, quality goes down. So amount and quality. Now that yeah.
When you say quality, do you mean like objectively how good it is, or quality like qualitative data? Or is it both?
I think it's both. More objectively how good it is, but it's data.
What is that?
You can use data to, it's not objective, it's subjective.
Okay. But it changes into like a less useful form?
Yeah. Wait, which one is up to a person and which one is based on numbers?
Subjective is up to subjects, objective is like the object.
Ah, okay, so it is objectively different.
Okay.
And watch this. I have a really crappy demo that I think will help explain what I'm saying, and I think all of you will understand this. So, there's a really horribly drawn propane tank connected by a hose to a stove with 2 burners, and one of the burners is on, and there's a skillet on the burner. And the first couple of parts I think are basic, and I'm guessing you understand, but I'll just review anyway to play it safe. The propane tank, if it's closed, has purely potential energy. Most of that is chemical potential, meaning if I can bring a flame to that gas, stuff is gonna happen, but there's nothing happening when the tank is closed. It has the potential to give off the energy stored in those carbon bonds. Potential energy? Touch your nose if you had physics as a freshman and you heard potential energy. So many of you had physics as a freshman. Now, even if you don't, I think even if you didn't have physical, I think you can follow the concept that that propane tank, if it's closed, it's not doing anything. But we all know that a tank of propane has a lot of potential to do stuff. Word for that, potential energy. Okay. I open the tank. I open the burner. I go click, 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 and I spark that gas that's leaving, and all of a sudden, a flame starts. What we're doing here is we are transforming from one form to another. We're going from the potential to do something interesting to actually, and by the way, let's talk about that flame. Theoretically, if the stove is working right and there's not too much airflow and you have the right amount of oxygen and you can keep all that heat, theoretically, I think this number is right. You could Google this. Propane burns at 2,760 degrees. Maybe that's natural gas. Either way, it's hot as F. So that flame, right at the side of the stove, that flame should be really hot. I said 2,800, but I think it's 27 something. That's really hot. And I'll just explain two more things about our setup, and then we can get some other vocab. You all know that the skillet is going to deflect a lot of that heat, right? It's not going to get to the full 2,700 degrees on the skillet because a lot of that heat is going to bounce off the sides or radiate outward. Most of you have an experience, right? As young people playing around with stoves and lighting little siblings on fire or whatever. That like when you're heating up the skillet gets pretty hot, like maybe 500-600 degrees. But the rest of the heat escapes out the sides, and you can tell because you can light your shirt on fire by accident, or the hot air, you'll feel it on your face, and it's really hot, right? We're all clear with how stoves work? You have some exposure to stoves? Your parents let you play with fire a little bit? A little bit. If you touch that skillet, it's really hot. Noah and Sebastian have seen Dr. Colin Wells burn himself at my house because we make lead sinkers there. That skillet itself gets really hot, like 500-600 degrees.
The rule is whenever Colin messes up on a way, we throw it into there and he has to stand next to it, and it just splats off when he messes up a way.
Holy crap. That's rugged.
Yeah. We don't tell him though, if he doesn't notice. He just throw it in.
Good thing I'm not looking. That skillet gets really hot. But watch me, watch me. If I raise my hand like 6 inches above the skillet, it's already cooled off to almost 400 degrees. And if I keep raising my hand like 3 feet above, it's cooled off to pretty easy, can't even tell that the skillet is on. And if I were to put my hand up by the ceiling, you could probably still measure that there is heat rising up there, but it's dissipated so much that it's almost nothing. Get ready for the explanations. So far, this all makes sense. You understand how skillets and stoves and propane works, right? Now comes the explanation. That's a lot of heat in one place. That has a lot of potential to do work. That's focused, and it's organized, and it can do a lot. 2,800 degrees, you could trap all that heat, and you could forge steel. 2,800 degrees, you could melt sand into glass and make glass bottles. You could, I don't know, run a steam engine and move a locomotive. You can do a lot. That is really high quality energy because it's all in one place. It's concentrated. It's organized. It's focused. It has the potential to do a lot of work. High quality. And then you can see that there's a lot of leakage of energy. So when the energy transferred from the fire to the metal, a lot of the heat was lost along the edges, and the metal's not quite as hot anymore. So you can see that quality's going down, 500, 400. Please look up. This is still heat. It's a little bit hotter up by the ceiling. That's still heat, but that's low quality because you can't really use that amount of heat for anything at all. When energy is so diffused that it's useless, we call that entropy. Entropy is useless energy. It's chaos. quality is how focused, how useful, how much work energy can do. If your energy can do more work, then it's higher quality. That is objective because there are things you can do with high quality energy that are not possible with low quality energy.
Quality is like how much potential for work it has.
Yeah. Potential for work, yeah. Yes.
So when you hear about like energy conservation projects and stuff like that, is that to try and minimize the amount that's dissipated?
I'm really glad that you asked, and this is the easy short answer. Energy conservation is about amounts, so input to output. So an energy conservation measure here would be to keep the heat from dissipating so that you have more heat going to the skillet so that you can turn down the gas so that you're using a smaller input for the same output, right? That'd be a conservation measure because we're talking about amounts. The separate idea though, the concept that hasn't even come up yet, we gotta wait until Unit 6 for this one, is that there's what we call second law efficiency, which is matching high quality energy sources for high quality outputs and using low quality sources for low quality outputs. So like you can heat your house with decomposing manure. You don't need to burn natural gas for that. Because the way that we heat our house is we use this flame where the goal is this degree of home warming. And you can fix that by painting your roof black or cutting down a tree that shades your window, right? So there are lower quality inputs that you could use for that desired output. So that's called second law efficiency. But all the conservation stuff that you're hearing is about amounts. There is a conservation concept about quality. And we'll come back to this in January, December. Okay. That should be it for study goal number 2, I think. Anybody got something you want to ask me about the laws of thermodynamics and energy additions and stuff?
Is entropy the disorganized energy or the state of disorganization?
Both. Both. Okay. I want to talk about our warm-up. And I want to drag it out because I want to draw from you one mistake that I hope we can clarify, because then when we clarify that, it helps us understand the conversation we got to have to do study goals 1, 3, 4, and 8. And that'll be our whole day. That's all we got to do. So yeah. So let's pretend that I ate 2,000 calories yesterday, which is a total bluff. I ate a lot more than that. I eat crazy crap tons of calories. I don't know why, but I eat obscene volumes of food. Yesterday I ate 3 English muffins, with cream cheese and apricot jam, 2 big mugs of coffee plus a cup of coffee, an apple and a banana. For lunch I had a huge asada burrito and then 4 birria tacos. When I got home at like 3:30, I ate a bunch of dried pears. Yes, pretty decent. Yeah. And I ate some chips. For dinner, I had 2.5 servings of my mom's shepherd pie. And I added cheese because I'm a monster. And I ate some bread with butter. And then I had 2 bowls of chocolate Cheerios for nighttime snack. And I think that's more than 2,000 calories any day of the week. But let's call it 2,000, just for the sake of conversation. We can pretend that I'm normal. All that food that I ate, does that mean that today, if I were eaten by a shark, I'm now worth 2,000 calories more than I was yesterday morning? What happens to all those calories? I burned them off, yes. I used those looking good and frolicking with your mama and yelling at high school kids and kicking my dog. So what happens to all my stuff? Because if you lined up all the food that I ate yesterday, it was probably like 3 English muffins and the apple and the banana and the burrito and the tacos and the shepherd's pie and the Cheerios. Probably like that. Food volume. But I mean, you can take my word for it, but I don't make that much poop. Like I'm sure that you haven't looked that closely at your poop, but imagine that you were to like lay it very carefully out on the sidewalk. It's a lot less than all the food you eat, so where does all that stuff go? What? Well, what does that mean exactly?
It's just keeping your body running.
But where does the matter go?
Respiration.
So where does it go?
You burn it up. Well, not burn it,
The atoms are still atoms, they gotta go somewhere. Back sweat? I make a good little bit of back sweat. So let's count all the water first. We'll count all the water. There's all my transpiration, the water that evaporates off my skin, plus all the evaporation from my exhales. That adds up to like 2 of these a day. You exhale about a half gallon per day. That's quite a bit of water vapor. So that's a whole bunch of stuff. And you get a lot of that from your diet, but a lot of it you have to drink on top. So from that giant food supply, I dehydrate it a little bit, and then I add more water to get rid of evaporation from my sweat, my exhalations, and my pee. But that's a lot of food. Where'd the rest of it go? You're all gonna make the same mistake, and so just go ahead and say it, but it's wrong. Yeah. So if I were gaining weight, that would be a reasonable assumption that I was stashing all of that. But strangely, for about 2.5 years, I've weighed the exact same, down to the same 1/10 of a pound. So my weight goes up and down, different times of the day, and I'll have a big day and a big week or whatever. But I'm still 199.6, which is pretty much what I've been for the last 2 years. $200 a sex appeal right in front of me. Raw good looks.
Is it maintaining body temperature?
Well, you're talking energy. I'm talking stuff. Where'd the stuff go? I just put that much stuff into Jose, And if you piled up all my poops, which are still pretty big poops, but if you piled up all my poops, maybe it'd be like that.
Does it replace dead cells?
Then where did the dead cell stuff go?
They all just scratch off.
Yeah, so you do leave a little bit. So you can take all of that poop and you can add a little dusting of dust. Do you all know that your dead skin cells are the primary ingredient in household dust? Your house is about 90% dead skin.
My house.
Your house dust, sorry. So if you run the vacuum cleaner and you pick up all that stuff, there's like a little bit of sand from your shoes, and there's like some hairs, more if you have a dog, and then the rest of the stuff in your vacuum cleaner is dead skin cells. You were wearing that. You pale people less. But really darker people losing their skin faster. It's a good thing. Hey, where'd all my stuff go? Some of it left as water, correct, various ways. Some of it leaves as droppings. So poop and dead skin cells, and nobody mentioned hair and fingernails, but that's a little bit of stuff. Where'd the rest of it go?
Is it like macronutrients?
Is it eaten by bacteria?
Nope. That entire periodic table, that's all stuff. Those are all atoms. They all have matter. They all have mass. It's just stuff. The funny thing is that when we break those bonds to get our energy out of it, you're right that we do digest our food inputs to break energy storage to do stuff. A whole bunch of those ingredients leave as gases. We breathe them out. We lose a whole bunch of our inputs as atoms that we don't think about because they're invisible, because they're gases, and we don't even think of that as stuff, but that's still stuff. So like all the gasoline you put in your car, like where does that stuff go?
So
Like you get the energy out of the carbon bonds, but where does stuff go that leaves as gases? Those gases are actually way heavier than the gasoline. 7 pounds of gasoline makes like 28 pounds of CO2 because you gotta add the oxygen to all the C's. Are you making a I don't believe you face?
No, I was
What?
just thinking.
You had a face of incredulity.
It's just crazy to think about.
It is crazy to think about. So crazy, I'm gonna draw it for you. Uh, 1 gallon equals 7.5 pounds. That's almost all carbon. And then when you turn the key and you drive, that's gonna leave as, I think it's 28 pounds. You could Google this for the right number. 28 pounds of CO2. Because you've had to attach this plus about 20 pounds of oxygen from the air around you. You don't think of it as stuff because it's just gas, but it's real and it's there. And that's where most of your stuff goes. It's not the turds you leave behind. It's all the stuff that you turn into gases and breathe them out after you've digested it.
Is a burp a large, like, output of stuff?
No, but a lot of it is just going out in your air. So like if you weigh your input of air, your output of air is greater. Like if you weigh your exhales, it weighs more than your inhales. If you're breathing in from a balloon of air and you were exhaling into a balloon of your exhalations, this one would be heavier than the one. Isn't that true? Yeah.
So could you like lose weight by breathing enough?
Yeah.
That's how.
Yeah. So like when you're working out, you're breaking more bonds, and so you're using more energy, but you're also breathing more because you're working out, and that's where your weight is going. Right? You'll probably pee more and poo more because your material leaves in a variety of ways. But I do this because I feel like, I mean, how many of you had thought about this before? Just saying. Like, I feel like when we're going to talk about metabolism and energy and spending stuff, we keep mixing up matter and energy. Or like, hey, where'd your food go? And you're like, I burned it to like make energy. Like that's not how it works. You don't change matter into energy and somehow the mass has disappeared. Like those atoms are still there. Everybody says that. Burn it off. Like, what? Like, you know that when you burn wood, you have gas left over, and that gas weighs more than the wood weight. You have to add oxygen to it, just like this. All right, fine. You're all bored. Yeah.
So when babies are growing
Yeah.
and they're like physically growing in size,
Yeah.
is that like they're not like the food that they're taking in is more of it is going towards building up their body than is like how does that?
Yeah, they're growing. They're making storage. So like, they are less efficient because a lot of their inputs are not making the same kind of outputs that my adult body makes. A lot of their outputs are just new biomass. So they're productive. They're putting more stuff into storage. So they need some input to operate that little body, and they need other input to grow the body, to make more stuff. Since I'm not really growing appreciably anymore, like, all I need is the input that's required to keep me operating. And so I can probably work on a smaller ratio of input to output than you, because I'm assuming that you're still growing. Like some of your inputs are still keeping you doing your sleazy life all day, but then you need some other inputs to make more muscle or make more bone or make more grossness, I don't know. Okay. Now that we've had that conversation, I'll make you a quick little drawing, and then we can move on. Okay, human eats hamburger. That's just a leg. Sorry. Okay, human eats hamburger. That human is taking some matter and some energy in here. There's stuff that the human might need to repair ruined cells, or it might be a growing human. And that has to be roughly equal to the matter and energy outputs of that human in some form. So, you know, some of the energy is being lost as heat, and some of the energy is being used to like move the feet around, and some of the energy is being used to like yell at your sister or whatever. And like I said, that's separate from the matter. One way to think about this is that the stuff, the atoms, are connected to other atoms by an input of energy, and the digestion of that stuff will release that energy. So you got two separate things to keep track of. The stuff and the energy. These are usually proportional. And you all realize, right, if your input is less than your output, you're going to lose weight because you got to use some of the stuff that you're carrying. And if your input is greater than your output, And then you're taking too much stuff and too much energy and you're not using all that, so that's gotta go somewhere. So that would be my cushion for the cushion. I love handles. And raw sex appeal. We got our matter, we got our energy. Everybody good with all this? Ask me something before I move on. Inputs and outputs, efficiencies, yes?
So what would like working out look like? Would the input and output of energy be the same?
Well, just the right amount of working out would be those are equal. Like, if you're trying to slim down, then you're gonna want more output than input. And then you can use some of your stored energy. This is all fat, and fat is just carbon stuck to carbon. So carbon bonds are a really good way to store energy. Our bodies really operate well with that method. So pretty much if I just use more energy than I'm putting into my body, then I'm gonna have to use up some of my stored energy, and that would make me smaller. Keep in mind, that's the energy part of this conversation. The matter will have to leave my body somehow. I will need to dump carbon atoms. So I'll probably breathe more because I'm working out, you know, so that I can use all that oxygen to stick onto all those carbons so that I can breathe out the CO2 part. Find an excuse to burn that energy so I can use up those carbon bonds so I can dump that carbon. Anybody else want to talk about this mass and energy difference? I kind of want you to have it in your notes somewhere that M does not equal E. Because it's a natural mistake, we all do it. I do it all the time, just like day-to-day speech, we always say that wrong. We all do it.
Is it like difficult for us to access our fat as energy storage? Because like
Kind of depends on your age and how old the fat is, but the short answer is it's not rocket science. So pretty much like weight loss is treated as this big social mystery in some societies, and you just go to a country where people don't get enough food and weight loss is pretty obvious. Or you talk to populations of humans that have to run away from the explosions, and they're pretty good at weight loss.
I mean, like if you had a very fat person and you like dumped them on an island,
I do have a very fat person. Where do you want to put me?
How long would they live? They would live longer off of the stored fat.
Yes, they would need more water, but yes.
Would they like slim down entirely?
Yes.
Like could they survive off that exclusively?
Yes. So not for extremely long. There's a lot of stuff that you cannot store. So they would need salts. They would need some vitamins eventually. So if this was like a gigantic person, they would eventually need some like coconut milk or some seaweed or something for micronutrients. But yeah, people do that. There are starvation diets for very, very large humans.
You just give them like salt and vitamins.
And they just give them like basically coconut water. And it's like, you know, you need a nutritionist to help you do this right, and nobody should try to starve themselves. It's not a healthy way to lose weight.
I'm not gonna try it.
But under the care of somebody who's qualified, I'm not sure who that is, but that's a thing you can do. Yeah, you should just make sure you keep eating because you're already see
So like coconut milk only for the
Oh, dude.
next 2 days till I die.
Yeah, one little sip of cocoa. Oh, he's gone. All right. Anybody else want to talk more about this matter versus energy part, or are we ready to move on? So I can do 3, then 1, then 4, then 8. I think. Yeah, I want to do 3, then 1, then 4, then 8. angry sun. Sends its love energy. To the happy flower. That is living in some dirt. Happy flower breathes CO2 from the air and takes some water out of its pot. And when you have the H2O and the CO2 and you throw in some of the sunlight, this thing will make some glucose and some O2 in a process called photosynthesis, and I'll bet you already knew all this, supposed to. And you probably know that at night, that will work in reverse. The plant will breathe out CO2 like you and I do. The plant will exhale water vapor like you and I do. We call this cellular respiration. And the point of cellular respiration is to release that trapped energy which had been used to build the carbon bonds that have now been broken here. This is probably easy, right? So, watch this. Plants have input of energy storage, that's a positive number. And then they have an output of energy, that's a negative number. And if they have anything left over, after that's all done, that could be a positive or a negative number, that's net productivity. I'd like you to write these things down. The gross minus the amount used at night equals the net productivity. And that's not rocket science, you already knew this. I'd like you to write down income minus expenses equals savings. At any given moment, I might have a little more fat or a little less fat. I might have a little more money or a little less money. But for basically 2 years, my inputs have equaled my outputs, so I have not changed body mass in the last 2 years. And by the way, my bank account has had huge infusions of income and huge outputs of expenses, and so I have zero savings. Yeah, my actual net flux for 2 years is no weight gained, no weight lost, and no money saved. I still weigh 199.6, I still have $0 in the bank. It's not supposed to be rocket science. This one I think is mellow. Got a little something to add though. Are we ready to start adding? If we go to a field that grows grass and it has 100, sorry, let's say 1,000, what is that? Million, let's say 100 million. That's an easy number to use. 100 million calories of grass in the field. Would I get 100 million calories of cricket if I introduce crickets to this field? Would I get the same amount? Why would I not get the same amount by feeding the grass to crickets? Let's assume that the crickets were eating all the grass. Why don't I get the same amount of energy content in my crickets? It's easy and it's simple and it's not a trick question. It's what you think. Why is the easy answer no?
Because the crickets use some energy to do stuff.
Yeah, the crickets use that energy. They might hop around, they might chirp, they might eat, they might bump into each other in the dark. I don't know what crickets gotta do, but the crickets will spend most of that energy. As a matter of fact, they're only gonna save, as a global average, the rule of thumb, they're only gonna save about 10% of that biomass. So their productivity is 10% of primary productivity. You may want to start taking notes because this becomes more critical soon. $10 million calories of cricket. And if I'm going to feed all of those crickets to mice, well, as a rule of thumb, you know that the mouse needs to spend some of its energy too, right? They have to do that like cute thing with their nose, and they gotta hop around, and they gotta twitch, and they gotta stay warm because they're mammals. So of all the energy that they eat, they can only build about 10% of that as mouse biomass. That'd be maybe 1 million calories of mouse. P.S. You can imagine that then there's other stuff, and then there's other stuff, and then there's the big predators. And this is why predators are a really good indicator of productivity. Remember I told you that predators are an indicator species? We discussed this about 2 weeks ago. Exactly 2 weeks ago. So you would say that tertiary productivity is 10% of this, which is precisely 1% of primary productivity. Do you understand what I'm saying? 10% of 10% is 1%? Study goal number 1 says, what is ecosystem energy flow? And that's trying to figure out where the energy is going, how much is stored, how much is spent. Study goal number 3 or 4. Study goal number 4 says, what is energy efficiency of trophic things? And it's usually about 10%. The rule of thumb is 10%. So now, I'd like you all to imagine that after the apocalypse or whatever, I grow some corn. I've made 1 million calories of corn, but in my country, we eat a lot of red meat. I don't like vegetables that much. I've made myself eat vegetables for an extended period of time. I try to raise my kids on a more balanced diet. But when I was a little boy, I ate red meat like 3 meals a day, every day, no exceptions. In my country, we eat double the closest follower-up nation of red meat, which is Australia. And that's 4 times the number 3 country, which is the United States. So if you thought that Americans eat too much red meat, you should come to Argentina, where we eat quadruple the American intake of red meat per human. I have literally, I'm not kidding, had steak for breakfast, then had steak for lunch, then had steak for dinner. Yes. I don't know. Grasslands. I don't know. That's a fine question. I don't know. There's got to be some interesting cultural history there. Because they don't eat much else. I don't know. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's how you make good looking. But imagine that after the apocalypse, I make myself 1 million calories of corn, and I don't like corn. Corn is grody. I want some, candy corn is even more grody. If there are 2 words that are oxymoronic, it is those. So let's say that I don't want that corn. I find me a cow. And I want to make that corn into cow. Steak is delicious. I'd like to promote this crappy ass corn into some good old steaks. How many of you can see where this is going already? What is the bad strategy after the apocalypse of feeding my limited corn supply to the cow? The cow's going to eat 100% of it, but it's going to spend. Right. The cow's going to spend. As a rule of thumb, 90% of that intake. And I think I can change my numbers and you'll still follow what I'm saying. Cows are really slow growing, so they take a long time to beef up. So they take a long time to grow. And because they take so long to grow, technically a cow in particular, cow is 4%. It is one of the most inefficient things I could possibly eat. I could eat rabbit and get more than 20% of my calories back from the same amount of corn.
Really?
Yeah.
You like the most efficient?
Yeah. So technically it would be cow versus rabbit.
Is it one more than rabbit?
Not that we eat socially. The guinea pig is slightly higher. But unless you're Ecuadorian, there's very few people who eat guinea pig. Yeah.
Rabbits make 6 calories per rabbits up there.
What?
Rabbits make 6 calories per rabbit.
Yeah, right. Chickens are like 15 or 16, depending on how you feed them. Goats are somewhere around 10 or 12. Whatever. That's just nerd talk. Let's keep it simple. Where did my other 900,000 calories of corn go? Well, first of all that material went somewhere. The cow either crapped it out or the cow breathed it out as gas. The stuff went somewhere. And the calories, that energy, that was spent running around. It was spent mooing. What else do cows do? Roll. Rolling.
Not being able to walk that.
Getting up from being tipped.
what about the milk they produce? Isn't that also?
Okay, maybe they use some to feed their offspring.
Singing Sandra Boyton song.
Okay, the list is endless. But here's a place where they didn't go, and this is important. You know where they didn't go? They did not go into meat. I just took all of these calories that could have gone to me, and instead of feeding them to myself, I fed them to the stupid cow who wasted it on its running and its moving and its rolling and its getting up and its feeding of its offspring, so that all I got to eat was this little bit. As a singular strategy for Jose surviving the apocalypse, I would have been much smarter to eat the corn than the cow. But number 8, there are implications for all of humanity, because, you know, we're all kind of living in the apocalypse here. Like, we're pretty much running out of places to make our food. Global food production stopped growing about 3 to 7 years ago, and globally, less calories are being produced every year as human food. We're running out of human food. We can't make more to keep up with population growth. So imagine this. I could take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 humans, plus myself makes 10, and we could all share that corn. Or I could take your plate, your plate, your plate, and your plate, your plate, your plate, your plate, and your plate, and my plate, feed them to a cow, and I would get enough steak for me. Every steak is 9 other humans not eating. And technically, because it's steak, it's 24 people, 22 people not eating. But whatever, that's because it's cow. As a rule of thumb, every time you go up 1 trophic level, there were 9 other humans who didn't get to share that trophic level with you. Now, I'm not saying that all humans have access to my same food supply. This is not to make you feel bad about liking meat. I love meat. But it is kind of an interesting detail. You know, we could probably have about 28 or 30 billion humans on Earth if they would just eat vegetarian diets. But because a few of us don't want to, they don't get the chance.